Well, we had that lovely day. Thank you very much for the invitation of the 14B kind of running recently with
we will
young,
get it there.
Yeah, we will. Young Valtteri, but here we have
slightly less young Karun Chandok the following week.
Yes, Karun. Here we have the 14B and the 15. Now, quite similar, but I'm sure if Adrian Newey was standing here, he'd probably find 27 different items immediately. But what catches the eye is the lack of the ears on the nose around the front suspension and the lower nicely swept side pods. The engine cover line is different, and of course it's got different wing regulations as well, which were the FIA technical spec regulations anyway for that year. And I think we've gone to narrow rears, haven't we, as well on the 15?
Yes, we have. Yeah, there was a tyre regulation change as well from 1992 to 1993. I've always thought, sort of in rather silly terms, but you've almost got a masculine in the 14B and a feminine in the 15C version of the same sort of principle. The 14B is sort of very aggressive and sort of hunch, whereas the 15C is just highly elegant. And I believe it is, aesthetically speaking, my father's favourite Williams, the FW15C. But of course, two cars that epitomise the height of engineering freedom within the World Championship, both equipped with active suspension, and Renault making the best engine in Formula One at the time even better by adding traction control over these 2 seasons. And of course the latter car, the FW15C, operated with both ABS and power braking systems over the course of 1993, and a CVT, a constantly variable transmission version of the car, was testing behind the scenes before the banning of all of those technical systems that became known as driver aids. But essentially CVT was trying to deliver us then what essentially we have now, which is a seamless shift gearbox, but of course not driven by ratios, but driven by 2 metallic cones driven by a steel belt. So a very, very different layout in the gearbox compared to what we had then and what we have now. I
remember being in the office with your dad the day he learned, or the weekend he learned, that CVT was going to be banned, and certainly expletives needed to be deleted, that's for sure. And understandably so. Yeah. I mean, it was the most ludicrous thing, and so many ludicrous things have actually happened. If you think, and as we are today, going through this sort of history of Formula One as personified by Williams, it does touch on so many different weird and crazy decisions that have been taken. But we've got to say, Adrian Newey, and still so powerful and strong and creative today.
Exactly.
But what a great job he did with Patrick Head, Patrick Lowe, Paddy Lowe, and the boys. I mean, it was just like a golden era.
John Sutton on the gearbox.
John Sutton on the gearbox, who's currently at McLaren, went to Ferrari.
Yeah.
And so many good people there.
Oh, a lot of great. I mean, obviously, sort of race engineers such as David Brown and John Russell, both of whom had very successful careers higher up the scale after those respective positions. It was almost a who's who of some of the most successful people of 1990s Formula One.
I'm glad that you think the 14 is the male version and the 15 is the female. I'm sure Nigel would agree with that one.
Yeah, I know it's a silly thing, but it's also how I view 2 of my other favourite racing cars that sort of competed head to head, which were the Shelby Cobra Daytona being masculine, and of course the Ferrari 250 GTO being feminine. If you look at a Cobra Daytona, it's not exactly the most feminine looking of cars, but a GTO is far from being a masculine looking car. So I do actually have that rather strange way of looking at racing cars, not with all of them, but with sort of like back-to-back racing cars. I often divide them by how I perceive their gender.
I've never done that, but I totally see where you're coming from.
It's copyrighted, so don't get in on the act.
Maybe copywritten?
Copywritten, even.
I must say, standing here now, looking at this FW19 under lights, it is a beautiful car. But you can see where the size is starting to appear in Formula One. It's a big car relative to the 11B already. Not as big as it's going to be, but it's very nice from this angle. In fact, it's a beautiful car from every angle.
It is, and it's a personal favourite of mine. It was sort of the year that I began to get some freedom in Williams to make some decisions to contribute with regards to drivers, and Juan Pablo Montoya was amongst one of the first people I was involved with putting into a Formula One car, and that happened to be an FW19 at the end of 1997. But it's an interesting car with regards to where we presently find ourselves, the Grand Prix Collection, because I'd have to double check, but I believe Williams, since our time as a constructor commenced in 1978, I believe we probably built, regardless of each design type, we probably built approximately 180 Grand Prix cars. And of all of those 180 cars, no individual chassis is more successful than the very car we're looking at here, chassis number 4 of the FW19 family. It was Jacques Villeneuve's race car for all but one of the 1997 Grand Prix season. Only the opening round in Australia was he in an alternative car. But so with the exception of the pole in Australia, all of his pole positions were taken on board this car, all 7 of his wins, and of course his race in Jerez wheel-to-wheel with Michael Schumacher was in this car, and it sealed the World Championship. And therefore, because of all of those exploits, it is the most successful individual chassis we have. It won a World Championship, it won 7 Grand Prix, and I think it took about 8 or 9 pole positions as well, so a very successful car. And of course, still just underneath the Mirage logo on this side of the side pod is one of the scuff marks, courtesy of Michael Schumacher's Ferrari wheel at the European Grand Prix at Jerez in 1997.
And Adrian Newey at this point is where?
Adrian Newey, this is more than appropriate to call an Adrian Newey car. It is evolutionary over his FW18, and he was responsible for the design of this car, but he had left Williams to pursue his opportunity at McLaren via gardening leave before this car ever turned a wheel in January of 1997. And certainly by the time that this car was in the dying weeks of the season, winning its last races and sealing its World Championships, Adrian was already at McLaren getting ready for what would be another Adrian Newey championship winning season, 1998, unfortunately with the wrong cars from our point of view.
But helped somewhat by Bridgestone tyres.
Yes, you would have to say that the Ferrari that year certainly was a very handy car as well, and it was the 3rd year of Michael and Jean Todt together at Ferrari, and of course the 2nd year of Rory Byrne and Ross Brawn joining them, so the Ferrari super team was on its way then too, and certainly was winning quite a few races. But I guess not every Bridgestone tyred car though was winning Grand Prix in 1998. No. So,
but on the McLaren, I mean, they were the first big team, weren't they?
They were the first. Really, I mean, Benetton went as well, but Benetton weren't sort of the team that they had been in the mid-90s and the late 90s. I don't think, by their own admission, their chassis were championship winning. But with McLaren in 1998, you had every box ticked. You had Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard on the design front. You had Mercedes powering. You had very competent sporting and commercial management, and of course you had the McLaren engineering side in the hands of people such as Adrian Newey, Neil Oatley and Paddy Lowe. So Pat Fry as well, of course, now at Ferrari engineering David Coulthard. So you were always going to have to be pretty strong to beat those guys.
Well, and, if you throw Coulthard into the mix as well, basically McLaren had the Williams team. That's why they won the championship in '98. Anyway, we won't go into that either.
Okay. Don't quite know if we'll get away with taking the credit for that one. We'll see.
2 cars that don't stand out in the history of Williams F1, but the FW21 here particularly, I've always thought was a beautiful little car. It's a shame it didn't have a better record. Equally, it's a shame, I think, that it didn't have a nice dark blue livery, perhaps, or maybe the Canon Williams Honda or Renault livery. It's a little bit of a dog's dinner, but in terms of its shape, I think it was a lovely, lovely little racing car.
I mean, I recall at the time thinking that, and then I sort of went dormant on the idea. I remember you and I had this discussion about a year ago, and I've looked back at it, and it is actually, I think, it's a car that really doesn't have a bad angle. It is a very good-looking car, but not our most successful period. This was a funny 2 years on which to conclude the 1990s on the back of our dominance through that decade, and they were the first 2 cars to have no Adrian Newey design input, and our approach was to promote engineers that we have within Williams to the more senior positions. So I guess it was only natural to give those guys time to find their feet. Hence the FW20 was nowhere near up to the job of defending our World Championships in 1998 with Jacques Villeneuve and Heinz Frentzen still at the wheel. Still an occasional podium finisher, and a regular point scorer to give us third in the World Championship. But with the exception of the Canadian and German Grand Prix, never really in the hunt for a victory come race day, which was a big change compared to the seasons that we were used to. And then the 99 car, I'd say, was probably a stronger competitor, a clean sheet of paper for that year under the new design regime, and in the hands of Ralf Schumacher, who was partnered by Alex Zanardi this year, who, as we all know, didn't enjoy the most successful of returns to Grand Prix racing. But Ralf scored points in 11 of the year's 16 or 17 races, and therefore single-handedly got us to 5th in the Constructors' World Championship. And on occasion, he was actually in the mix for Grand Prix victories. He finished second, which was our best result of the year in Monza. A touch ironic because we were essentially using a 2-year-old customer version of Renault's 1997 V10 by this point, so you would think that we may have struggled more on the horsepower circuits than elsewhere, but we were actually very competitive with that engine in this car. And he was also, with all due respect to what was a very merited and very memorable Grand Prix victory by Stuart Ford, of all of the people who had problems in front of Johnny Herbert that day at the Nürburgring, I think Ralf was the only guy who he'd been right in the mix at the front from the very start with Frentzen and the 2 McLarens, and actually had pretty much driven his way into the lead. But he was the only guy not to make a driving error or have his car fail upon him. We actually picked up a debris puncture just as we were going through the last corner, so missed the pit lane entry. Still finished 4th despite doing 1 lap on 3 wheels, so I do actually feel that was a win that we'd sort of merited, but I don't want to be disrespectful towards Johnny Herbert and Stuart Grand Prix who won that race, but I feel that of all the people who sort of were in front of them, we were the ones that sort of weren't the cause of our own demise, so to speak.
And Ralf was impressive then, and was to become even more impressive. And we shouldn't forget how quick Ralf Schumacher was. He was a seriously quick racing driver, as Juan Pablo Montoya, I'm sure, would say to this day.
Ralf Schumacher on his day, and there were quite a few days, he rattled cages, not just Juan Pablo, but drivers such as, of course, Michael Schumacher, his brother, Kimi Räikkönen. I mean, Ralf had 6 Grand Prix victories during his 6 years with Williams, but they came within a 3-year period, the height of our success with BMW. And I mean, he was probably, he had a little bit of a difficult end to his couple of years with us, in that there were 2 sizable accidents, the first of which is a little less public, but I've actually seen the CCTV footage of it, which was a much more spectacular looking accident than his very famous one at Indianapolis in 2004. In pre-race testing at Monza in 2003, he suffered a rear suspension failure, which was an operational fault by Williams, nothing to do with Ralf. And the car went through a series of sickening cartwheels and barrel rolls through one of the Lesmos, and only CCTV video footage caught it, which we still have, and it's one of the most frightening looking accidents I've ever seen a Williams involved in. But even despite those 2 accidents, there was still some strong performances after that. Canada 2004, Japan 2004. On his day, a very, very quick racing driver.
Johnny, one thing that I do love about this car, I must say, and I know you'll think the same way, is the Woody Woodpecker on the side, which makes me think of our friend Rick Baldwin.
Of course,
and his long-term friendship with your dad,
and the team,
which goes back to
Fruit of the Loom.
Fruit of the Loom T-shirts at Long Beach. And he was a great supporter of Williams over the years. Sadly, no longer with us, but just he was so enthusiastic about that whole Universal and the whole
No, it added. I mean, it was sort of 2 years of departure from the norm for Williams in terms of our appearance. It was a rather loud, sort of brash, red livery Williams, but obviously, what with the arrival of BMW, we couldn't sustain that sort of approach to our marketing within Formula One. But there was a lot of fun off the track with the people that you see represented on this car, not just Woody Woodpecker, but also Winfield, Veltins, Castrol, Petrobras, just some great people who were the representatives of those companies who very kindly supported our efforts in the World Championship back then.